Leave your legal question for us on our toll-free law line at 888-203-7LAW.
And we're back with Jeff Harris talking about dangerous premises, which sounds dangerous just saying it.
It's a scary sounding topic, I realize that.
So what are we talking about? We're talking about hotels, parking garages, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, basically the concept is that sometimes when a crime is committed, there's also civil liability. And basically criminal cases deal with putting people in jail and punishing them for committing crimes, and civil cases deal with compensating people if they've been injured. And there are certain situations where if someone commits a crime against you, although it's a crime and it's prosecuted by the prosecutor's office, there also may be a civil remedy for you where you can recover money damages.
Is that why many new hotels that are constructed, used to be the term down and out, you know, in a hotel where all the doors were outside, and now they have center entryways?
Exactly. I mean, the premise is that hotels or any kind of establishment that invite people onto their premises to buy things or to receive services have a responsibility to act reasonably towards their customers. And what that really means is if the hotel or the shop or the store has notice or has reason to know that something could happen to the patron while they're there, then they have to take reasonable steps to ensure that that doesn't happen. Now, obviously, they can't ensure that crimes don't happen, and that's not what the law requires because that would be overly burdensome. But they do have to act reasonably, and they have to take reasonable steps to make sure that the folks who come on their property are protected either from crime or perhaps from some sort of defect in the product. Like if they have a big hole in the floor and you're going to fall through that, then they have to take steps to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right. But cases like that we're talking about here have led to changes in architecture.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
I mean, because it used to be most hotels or motels, they did have doors on the outside.
That's right.
And because of cases like this and people like yourself, you know, we now need the credit card just to go down the hallway.
Absolutely. I mean, and it doesn't take a whole lot for a property owner to do minor things that are going to deter crime. And the law tries to encourage that, and that's what these cases are all about. If they have security systems on their premises, if they have good lighting, if they make sure that they hire good employees and check their background, if they do all those kinds of reasonable steps, then they can go a long way towards making sure that bad things don't happen to the people who come onto their property.
So what are some of the premise downfalls or should you be looking for when you go to a place?
Well, it depends on what the place is. But for example, if you live in an apartment complex, that's a classic example where these cases come up. And a lot of times these are tragic cases. If you live in an apartment complex and there's a crime that occurs at the apartment complex, then if you're the victim of that crime, obviously the first thing you need to do is make sure you take care of yourself, get the medical care you need, make sure you cooperate with the prosecutors, and do everything you can to make sure that the criminal is prosecuted and apprehended. But you also need to think to yourself, well, wait a minute, is the the apartment complex partially responsible for this? And they may be if, for example, it's a rape on an apartment complex or an assault on an apartment complex, the apartment complex may well be responsible in part because they knew that this was happening. It happened to other folks on the property and they didn't tell you about it. And that's really what these cases are all about, this concept of notice. If the apartment owner or the property manager knows that it's happening because it's happened to other people, then they've got a duty to tell you about it so you can protect yourself, but also do things that are going to deter crime on their premises.
Now what about burglaries, for example? Could you sue for having your home burglarized if you were in an apartment because the landlord didn't trim the bushes around the windows and nobody could see somebody breaking in?
Well, I guess you could, but I mean, typically that's not the kind of thing that you're going to want to bring a case for. As a technical matter, yeah, you could, but most of these cases are really directed towards personal injury. If you've been injured, if someone assaults you, or there's a sexual assault, those are the kinds of cases that we're talking about really here. Also, molestation cases, child molestation cases. If you entrust your child to a daycare center and the child is molested at the daycare center, there may well be a civil case, especially if the daycare center didn't do enough to investigate the background of the folks who are working there, or even knew that the person who was working there might have had something bad in their history.
Do most of these places have insurance against things like this?
They do.
So you're going after not only the owner but the insurance company as well?
Typically, any facility that invites people onto their property or takes care of children, for example, will have some sort of general liability policy that will cover these kinds of acts.
And you mentioned negligent hiring, and that's a basis you can base your whole case on.
Sure. I mean, if you hire somebody, the whole concept of negligence, which is just a 50-cent lawyer word for acting reasonable, just do reasonable things. And when you're hiring someone, if you have a reason to know that that person might be dangerous to other people, then you shouldn't hire them, first of all, but you ought to take reasonable steps to investigate their background and make sure that there's nothing bad in that background. And the same thing goes after you hire them. There's another claim called negligent retention, and that is if you keep somebody on after you've hired them and you determine that they have done things that might endanger customers, then you got a duty to get rid of them, make sure that they don't put other people in danger.
At what point does being a good Samaritan and giving somebody a second chance interfere with watching out for the future?
Well, that's a good question, and it's really a question of balance. I mean, there may be somebody who's an employee who has a criminal background and who has paid their debt to society and would be a good employee, but you just have to remember, if you're an employer, if that person goes out and does something like that again, you may well have some liability. But it's a question of balance, and it's something that ultimately you're going to have to make a judgment call on.
And that judgment call can not only lose your business, you could lose your home, everything else.
Yeah, but I mean, the law occasionally makes sense.
Yeah.
And in this case, if you had somebody who just had one act in their background, that's probably not going to be enough to trigger liability for negligent hiring. But it might, depending upon the circumstance.
If you're the one that got hurt, there's no punishment strong enough.
Absolutely.
What kind of evidence is needed?
Well, notice. I mean, that's really the heart of these cases. If this has never happened before, if a crime occurs on a piece of property and they've never had any problems before and they had no reason to expect this and no reason to anticipate this problem, then you're not going to have a case. But the flip side is, if it's happened a lot, if there have been similar crimes or similar acts and things that would have put the property owner on notice, then they have a duty to do something about it. And that's really the heart of these cases, this concept of notice.
So a brand new shopping center, brightly lit, somebody's attacked in the parking lot, they even have security footage of it happening. It seems like that person did everything reasonably.
Absolutely. Most of the new property developments have security consultants that they actually work with to make sure that their properties are safe and that they've put all the kinds of things in place that will ensure that people who come on there are protected.
But the $29.95 a night hotel on I-95, not part of a chain, darkly lit parking lot, the rooms open to the parking lot. The guy didn't do anything to watch out for his guest safety.
Right.
This is a hotel you could potentially own.
Right, and that's if you wanted it, and you'd be stuck with a horrible hotel as part of your damages. But those cases are typical because you have a series of police reports where the police are constantly coming out there to that hotel and trying to stop the crime, and that's absolutely notice.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. We hope you enjoy this episode. Talking Law TV, I'm Michael Shortt. This has been Jeff Harris. If you'd like to reach Jeff about anything that you heard tonight, you can reach him through our website at talkinglawtv.com. If you have a question, please give us a call at 888-203-7-LAW. Good night, everybody.